For nearly 3 months, I spent around 4 hours a day on a single miniature. From what was supposed to be a fun tribute to my favorite Warhammer faction, turned into an absolute monster of a project. So today I'll show you every big decision that turned this from a normal painting into a 300-hour obsession. And just for the record, no, this is not normal, it's just me weaponizing my OCD. Now, one thing that made the process longer are sub-assemblies. In the last video, you've seen me assemble and convert this project, and that took plenty of time already. But you can always check that video later, you'll also get to see just how many different Warhammer boxes I had to buy for it. But let's talk about painting. Sub-assemblies can be tricky, because you might end up painting some bits that will be completely covered. So I started with the one thing that certainly won't be: the cloth. And right here I already shot myself in the dick. It's true that the cloth needs to be painted, but there is one big problem. When you look at the finished miniature, what is the main idea here? Well, we have a space samurai pirate who is stealing this poor Eldar's soul using this glowing MacGuffin. It's the magic device which is still missing, which is pretty bad because it emits the light. So I can paint the cloth all I want, but later on I'll still have to make some changes. It's possible to sketch the magenta light, so that's what I do, but we don't really know how intense it's gonna be. So while sub-assemblies might be cool, missing the arm didn't help. Other than that, for this cloth, I was inspired by Albert Moreto Font and the way he paints fabric. It's the Slayer Sword winning elf that was my inspiration, because I really like the texture here. The same stippling was done on this cloth. It's composed of hundreds, no, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of tiny dots. And although it sounds lengthy, this was done fairly quickly. As I paint the cape here, I suppose we should make the lesson clear. You should paint the most important parts first. If you don't, you are just setting yourself up to be absolutely miserable later. Why, you ask? Simple. Imagine that now I make the cape too bright or the wrong color. I only get to find that out once the light source is painted. So here, actually, whatever you see me do, well, it doesn't really matter, because most of it is gonna be repainted anyway. I would say I could have saved like solid 30 to 40 hours of painting if I only had a better plan. Ultimately, it's these complex projects that help you truly engrave these lessons into your brain. So let's skip forward to the point where I realized I really need to see that light source. Right, we are so back. All I need to do is glue the arm really carefully before painting the soul trap. You know, I started with the fabric because I thought those parts are gonna be the easiest, only to forget that the light source determines what everything else looks like. Speaking of which, this is another major time sink. I wanted to paint purple glow, but purple is like the worst color for glow effects. The reason being that purple is super dark. And how the hell do you want to paint something that emits light while being quite dark? So to make it easier for myself, I had to pivot halfway through and include way more magenta, which is like my favorite color anyway. Now I will tell you a secret why everything on this model took so goddamn long. It all comes down to rendering. Deciding what things are supposed to look like is not that difficult, but rendering and forging them in the exact way you want is what takes forever. And this soul trap and everything touched by magenta even more so. If you wonder how do I make such a saturated magenta, it's because I am using fluo paints from Golden. This is excellent for glow effects, but there is one huge downside with fluo paints: their coverage. And on top of that, I had to balance how much of the magenta there is. You see, I gotta strike the exact right balance of white, magenta, purple and black. If the ratio is slightly off, then it falls apart. Too much white means it won't be saturated, too much magenta will look cartoonishly stupid, but without it, it'll look too dull. And at the same time, it's a nice touch to keep some parts black to get contrast. So balancing all of that on such a tiny surface would make an excellent exercise for brain surgeons. Equal to whatever the fuck this is. Now, the soul trap is not entirely finished, but this is enough to imagine everything else. By the way, for everything I painted on this miniature, there will be a detailed process on Patreon. This includes the soul trap, the gold, the armor, and pretty much everything else. So if you wanna level up your painting, check the link in the description. Since at this point we can see where the light is coming from, we can sketch everything else. This was sort of a breaking point of this project. Once the light source was clear, I could choose what to do with the rest. And for that, I simply sketch. I don't know why people in mini painting don't sketch more, to be honest, it's just a very natural thing to do. Of course, I'm not talking about painting armies or anything like that, but for standalone pieces, it only makes sense to sketch and refine later. And for the armor, I really need it. So again, do you remember the 8th edition Codex cover? Yeah, I still wanna paint something that resembles that. And I already modified the helmet to look similar. The original helmet doesn't have the ears, and the mask is slightly different. But what will truly make it similar is having that shiny armor. Sketching the reflections makes it easier to imagine the end result. I'm sure you've seen the memes in the past. If you wanna draw an owl, you start with a bunch of circles, and then draw the rest of the f***ing owl. Obviously, there is some random bullshit between these two to get the end result. Well, not really random, but you get the point. You gotta start rough, and then sort of see the painting crystallize in front of you. I suppose people are a bit hesitant to sketch on miniatures, because they are afraid of the paint buildup. Even though you would have to use a lot of freaking paint for that to happen. But if you dilute your paint and spread it well, you don't have to worry about that. One thing that I almost always enjoy is painting gold. This was my little happy place. Both the shoulder pads and the knee pad use the same color recipe I always use, with one major difference. I also added magenta to paint the exposed sides. Actually, this is a good opportunity to show you just how complex this project is. You see, gold looks yellow because it doesn't reflect blue frequencies of light very well. And do you know what happens when you combine blue and red? Well, that's exactly it. Our magenta light source. But the problem is that gold will only make the red frequencies visible. The blue ones are absorbed. So the overall expression on the knee pad and the shoulder pad is red, not really magenta. So while I would say this is fairly easy, it does take a lot of time. The shoulder pads also have some nice intricate details, and the only way to work with them are the edges. I gotta say, this is one of the things I don't like about Warhammer models. These small models require high precision, but in the cabinets they are not as interesting to look at as busts or 75mm models. And then I dread the time I spend on these tiny details when they are barely appreciated. But at least with the scale creep in Warhammer, the modern models are getting bigger. So we've used subassemblies to reach everything, right? It's time to cash in on that before giving him the other arm and the head. If you wanna know how long it took me to paint the armor alone, after the sketch mind you, it was exactly 15 days. And I know that because I checked the recording date. This makes it the single most time-consuming thing on this model, but it's also the most important one. To put it simply, the armor is what makes this model fun to look at. At least that's what I think. Everything had to be super neat and tidy, because my obsessive brain wouldn't have it any other way. At this point, it's worth putting up a reminder that you don't have to paint like this. You can get a result that's about 90% just as good in about half the time. But that final 10% or so really freaking bothers me. I am using super small brushstrokes to create the exact image that's in my head. But in the process, I paint over some other stuff, and that needs to be fixed, and so on and so forth. This inflates the painting time tremendously. So, no wonder it took 15 days. And yet again, the magenta parts are probably the most time-consuming. Fluo paints are not super easy to work with unless you airbrush them. But here, there is not enough room to do that. One trick I like to use when attaching the subassemblies is to partially strip them before gluing them together. The inner armor has been painted, so there is nothing stopping me from putting the helmet on top. I also like to use thick superglue specifically because it allows for some minor changes before it completely dries. I gotta say, the helmet was one of the most enjoyable parts. Typically, I do enjoy painting faces and helmets quite a lot. Makes me wonder, why don't I paint more busts? Anyway, the process here is fairly similar to other golden bits, but there is more stuff to play around with. It's especially the mask that makes this figure so appealing. I mean, this picture right here really summarizes how I feel about Drukhari. They are just so freaking cool. Going a bit further, we had things like the little badge or the blade. But those are fairly straightforward, so it's barely worth mentioning. It's just those big and reflective surfaces that are more complex over matte materials. Remember, the more shiny and reflective something is, the more potential it has to pick up stuff from the environment. So things like reflective armor or a shiny blade can pick up on the light source colors, ambience, and whatever colors are around them. On the other hand, very matte surfaces like a black t-shirt won't have that much interesting stuff to portray. So if you wanna paint something interesting but complex, choose shiny materials which can have many nuances. You can still make matte materials interesting by, for example, texturing them. But there is only so much you can do. Actually, you know what? This exact topic was covered in my last newsletter. In there, I cover various things that help miniature painters step up their painting. So check the link in the description so you don't miss the next one. Anyway, I wanna skip forward a bit and get back to fabric. Everything else has the magenta light painted. So does the cloth, but it needs to be adjusted. It's kinda nuts that at this point it's been more than a month since I last touched the fabric. It really goes to show you how much labor these tiny miniatures require. Especially when we wanna make them quote-unquote perfect. I also wanted to fill the empty space at the front. Whenever you're missing something, it's not a bad idea to check the box art. And there, the cloth has this freehand pattern at the bottom. It's a simple solution, but effective. The only thing that makes it more complicated is shading the freehand, and including the magenta on it. But even then, this is really nothing compared to the cape. After painting the other details like the broken gemstones and stuff, I still had to adjust the cape. This would be like the third or fourth time repainting it. To be fair, it's not like I repaint the entirety of it, but the changes are major, and unfortunately, this is actually a really important bit. It acts as a backdrop for the glow effect, as well as the soul of the dead Eldar. As such, it will pull a lot of attention. But at the same time, it shouldn't pull too much. In retrospect, you can see how the glow effect made everything so much more difficult. I do like the idea, and I would even say I like the execution. What I don't like is the amount of time spent on it. But luckily, we can proceed to the base. Unlike for other projects, the base was kinda painted throughout the entire process. I had to get a good idea if the interaction between the figure and the environment works. Because if they feel too disconnected, it simply wouldn't. Developing it along with the miniature made it much easier to integrate. I gotta admit that even here I made some changes. Initially, the Eldar Guardian was supposed to be red, because it's iconic. The problem? It would stand out too much. So instead, I've picked a different craft world that actually exists in the lore. The colors are much more subtle, and it won't be distracting. Now, when putting the model together, I had to do it super carefully. These are huge milestones, and they shouldn't be rushed. After all, you can repaint something, but it's pain in the ass to reattach it. Of course, the details had to be painted, whatever, but there is something very special about the soul. You see, I wanted it to stand out against the cape, so the natural choice would be to make it blue. But just making it blue was not enough. To outline the soul against the cape, there is a dark outline around it. It's a neat little trick that will make the main viewing angle so much more powerful. And after painting up the rest of it and dropping on some dry pigment, this is what we got. Gotta say, I am really happy with it. Yes, there might be some minor things I will change, but overall, I love this Archon. But still, you don't really know how I constructed the base, do you? Well, if you wanna see how I had to use over $600 worth of Warhammer just for this base, watch this video next because it's exactly about that. And see you there!